Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Bridging the Gap Between the Promise of Digital Health and Operational Excellence. I'm Emily Rapley with Becker's Hospital Review. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. If you're in the audience and you'd like to submit a question, you may do so at any time during our webinar simply by typing it into the Q&A box you see on your screen. We look forward to hearing your questions. Also, please note that today's session is being recorded and will be available after the event. To access the recording after the event, use the same link you used to log into the webinar today. And now I'd like to introduce our topic. Digital health is a rapidly growing industry, and many hospitals and health systems are evaluating multiple options. The question for many is, how do you marry the promise of digital health with a tangible ROI for your organization? As the health tech space grows busier, it's become increasingly difficult to identify the best platform to meet the specific needs of your clinical teams, grow market share and profitability, and outlast competing systems in the long run. The Connecticut Joint Replacement Institute at St. Francis Hospital has taken an innovative leadership approach to bridging this gap, and as a result, has achieved one of the most efficient and value-focused operations in the country, delivering best-in-class quality for their patients. In this 60-minute webinar, we'll discuss strategies for aligning clinical and administrative leadership, establishing a foundational culture of evidence-based decision-making, and using digital health to improve patient engagement and satisfaction, scale contemporary efficiencies, and ultimately build new business opportunities. At this time, it is now my pleasure to start our webinar today by introducing our presenters. Bronwyn Spira is the CEO and co-founder of Force Therapeutics, a leading digital health platform and research network. Bronwyn is a serial entrepreneur and physical therapist with over 20 years of clinical experience. Joining her today is Stephanie Kelly, the Executive Director of the Connecticut Joint Replacement Institute. With over 25 years in nursing and 15 years in a management role, Stephanie has a proven track record of successful leadership during a time of progressive changes to healthcare. In 2013, she became the executive director of CJRI and soon after assumed oversight of the entire orthopedic program, including the spine, trauma, and sports medicine. Also here today is Dr. Stephen Schutzer, who is a founding member and the medical director of the Connecticut Joint Replacement Institute. He did his general surgical training at the University of Rochester and completed his orthopedic residency at the University of Connecticut. He was then a fellow in adult hip and reconstructive surgery at Massachusetts General Hospital and entered practice with Orthopedic Associates of Hartford in July 1986. He's currently on the staff of St. Francis Hospital and Medical Center, where he also serves as a physician executive for orthopedics. I'll now hand it off to Bronwyn to give a bit of background on Force.
Thank you, Emily, and hello, listeners. So Force Therapeutics is the leading digital care platform and research network. Over the last decade, we've successfully partnered with dozens of health systems to deliver a rich patient experience platform, which guides patients through digital care plans, from pre-op optimization, injury management, to post-op care. In doing so, we deliver data and insights to help inform evidence-based best practices for surgeons and care teams. Some of the esteemed institutions we work with today include Geisinger Health System, Yale New Haven Health, Scripps Health, Partners, and Dartmouth Hitchcock, and of course, Connecticut Joint Replacement Institute at St. Francis. Some of the impacts we've seen across our partners include reductions in readmissions, complications, and length of stay, improved patient satisfaction, as well as operational efficiencies for the entire care team. All of these factors impact the total cost of an episode of care to varying degrees, but all contribute to managing down healthcare costs across the board. And now I'll pass it to Steve for some background on CJRI.
Thanks very much, Bronwyn. It's a pleasure to be here today. So here's a brief snapshot of our history. It's an interesting story. In 2006, 10 surgeons who were members of 5 competing private practices were affiliated with 3 different hospitals in the Hartford area. We came together to discuss the future of total joint arthroplasty in our region. We ended up forming a management company, which we called Connecticut Joint Replacement Surgeons, incorporated in 2006, we drafted a memorandum of understanding and presented that to St. Francis Hospital. And after a period of due diligence in July 2007, a consulting agreement, today more commonly known as a co-management agreement, was signed with St. Francis, and our first case was performed in August 2007. To date, we've performed 38,000 joint replacements with an annual run rate of about 3,500 per year, and one of the largest joint replacement institutes in the United States. And in Connecticut, we've been the highest volume facility since we opened. Subsequently, in October 2016, St. Francis was acquired and became a member of Trinity Health National System. Brahma?
Thanks, Steve. So let me just, so from just a high level, we're going to be discussing today a little bit about the state of the industry from the perspective of why centers of excellence like CJRI actually exist. We're going to talk through some strategies that you can implement for achieving operational excellence. And then we're very excited to have some incredible insights into how CJRI bridged the gap between the promise of digital health and achieving operational excellence as they realized and executed on their vision. I'd like to thank Steph and Steve for their transparency and willingness to share some of their secret sauce with you all today. And after we hear from them, we will welcome some questions after some concluding remarks. So just to set the stage and create some context here, let's start off by taking a look at the current state of the industry for total joint replacements and what is driving change. So the first thing is that, there's this incredibly rapidly growing volume and demand for total joint replacement. SG2 predicts that by 2030, total hip arthroplasties annual volumes will grow by 171%, and total knee arthroplasty will grow by 189%. So as we think about that, it becomes clear that patients who were long considered the most neglected stakeholder are increasingly becoming the most critical stakeholder and driving the long-term success of your organization. Patients have come to expect a rich, connected care experience and have increased transparency into physician and hospital performance. According to a recent survey of U.S. health consumers, 93% of patients expect to use digital tools to facilitate and heighten their access to care, which means they've become more autonomous than ever regardless of their demographic status. But patients can also become confused and overwhelmed with misinformation from Dr. Google and other miscellaneous sources in this age of information overload. So what does success look like? If done right, the delivery of prescriptive digital care plans can empower patients to be active, autonomous participants in their recovery. Shared decision-making throughout the episode is the cornerstone of the provider-patient relationship. In fact, it's the foundation of meaningful interactions between patients and their care team. Setting expectations based upon evidence and data is a critical step in establishing trust and compliance. And well-coordinated care establishes credibility and greatly enhances the patient experience and patient satisfaction. So in today's world, patients and families increasingly understand the value of access to their providers as a cornerstone of care. And, as I mentioned, it's a tech-enabled world, right? And so patients have come to expect some type of digital access to their care team. And they also expect an integrated approach to their care. They don't want to be hearing different things from different members of their care team. So if we're successful in providing them with a framework, with this kind of framework, we can eliminate unnecessary waste and create a standardized, repeatable, and positive experience for all patients. And so now I'll hand it back to Steve for a word on alternate payment models.
Yeah, thanks, Bronwyn. Americans don't agree on much, but 92% agree on one thing, red or blue, that we have a serious crisis in healthcare today. And the crisis is both in quality and pricing, specifically lack of transparency. About half of Americans receive their healthcare coverage through an employer-sponsored plan, and of those, probably 3/4 receive health coverage from a self-funded, self-insured employer plan, simply meaning the employers are bearing the financial risk of paying for healthcare of its employers and their dependents. So the annual cost of a family health plan today from Kaiser is about $20,000, about $14,000 to $15,000 for the employer and $5,000 to $6,000 for the employee. And though some of my colleagues are hesitant to admit it, I think from our side, the provider side, the root cause is and has been the dominant reimbursement model for decades, fee-for-service, which is volume-based compensation with zero accountability for outcomes. The diagram above is just a portrayal of the potential opportunity for waste and low-value services in a traditional total joint arthroplasty episode. It's a whopping $20,000 over a 90-day episode. So there's finally movement afoot to bury fee-for-service and create a reasonable reimbursement model based on the true cost of care with accountability for outcomes. And we're particularly in favor of the concept of bundled payments, and it works. So we're not in any of the federal programs. We can talk about that later. But for those who were in the BPCI programs for total joint arthroplasty, the average saving on an episode was about $1,630. That's average over the country. Some of my colleagues in New York saved far more than that. On the commercial side, which is where we've been, our experience with bundled payments, where we have ferreted out the waste, ferreted out the duplication, have enabled us to price our bundle well below standard fee-for-service a la carte market rates. So one of the major opportunities within a bundle price for the full episode has been managing something that we've not had any experience with or any interest in, for that matter, and that's a post-acute experience. So at CJRI, our relationship with Force Therapeutics has been a key driver in our success in doing so, which has been bringing care, independent self-care, virtually to our patients on the Force platform. So what are purchasers saying today? Yeah, we hear it all the time. They're saying we've had it. We've had enough of this. The 5 to 6% trend line is just not sustainable. And they're taking a much more active role, becoming market shapers, becoming more active and not so passive by supporting those of us that can demonstrate the ability to reduce waste and unnecessary cost. We're willing to accept accountability, agree to stable and predictable non-fee-for-service pricing with a continued emphasis on excellent service and quality, even more than their employees have ever experienced in the past. So what does accountability for cost really mean? It's very simple. It's accepting performance risk for mitigating disease and for preventable complications after surgery. And they're going to want to see data. They're going to want to see your data with full transparency into cost and quality. And they're also seeking to contract, to direct contract with high-performing networks and centers of excellence. And for those of us who can do this right, it really spells insurmountable opportunity. And if you notice, they're also extending their reach and control with other innovative solutions, such as direct primary care models and primary care clinics. Walmart is setting this up, CVS setting up, many others are setting up these very efficient primary care clinics. So how do we respond? How do the providers respond to these seismic changes? Well, think about Amazon and the Amazonification of everything, including healthcare. We have to provide virtual care solutions and telehealth options for our patients. This is what our customers want: digital options, immediate access, and increasingly they prefer self-care. And these are low-cost and scalable enterprise solutions. What about from the physician perspective? How have we traditionally rated success in practice? I think first and foremost, as a practitioner, my primary concern has been with patient safety, patient satisfaction, and outcomes. Also, as a surgeon, I can't tell you that control, for a surgeon, autonomy and control really supersedes about anything else. Having control over my time, my team, my techniques, and my ability to generate healthcare outcomes is really paramount. And yes, from the fee-for-service world, which thank goodness is steadily diminishing, we've been concerned with per-case reimbursement. But if you look at the right side of the slide, you can see from a hospital perspective, although we're both lumped together as, quote, providers, end quote, we typically have very different thoughts and ideas and perspectives about models for success. So, Steph, you want to touch on that?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Schitzler. That's exactly right. These varying perspectives typically create tension if not managed correctly. Here's what the modern-day hospital is thinking about: increased annual revenue, growing market share, and more hospitals now understand and want to become a distinguished center of excellence for appropriate service lines, undoubtedly leading to a distinct superior brand, national ratings or rankings, etc. As a result of all this activity, we're now seeing renewed interest in multi-stakeholder alignment and provider consolidation across the country. For example, at large scale, we're seeing health systems purchasing community hospitals, formation of some physician supergroups, but for many on this webinar, our model, which we'll get into in a moment, just may be a better option for you, forming effective physician-hospital partnerships. There is unquestionably a trend towards fewer, larger health systems controlling a significant portion of a given market. But then, within these complex systems, there is a potential to create a highly specialized center of excellence. But for this to play out for the benefits of patients and purchasers, it must go beyond expending resources, adding more personnel, adding more brick and mortar. There must be consolidation of like-minded ideas to cultivate strategic excellence, but above all, there is a strong and aligned physician leadership working collaboratively with enlightened hospital leadership. And then, to this, a team of dedicated mid-level practitioners, downstream providers, and enabling digital technologies, all working towards a shared vision. With this, you'll be positioned for success. Bronwyn?
Thanks, Steph. That is really well said. So let's, jumping off of that, let's define what a center of excellence actually means to understand why employers and purchasers are increasingly seeking out validated COEs, especially in the musculoskeletal space. So this impressive definition of a COE is the mastermind of the Connecticut Moving to Value Alliance Committee on Centers of Excellence. And in my opinion, it's the most comprehensive, thoughtful, and clarifying description that I've read. So if any of you are calling in and can't see your screen, I'll read it for you. A center of excellence is a patient-centered, data-driven business within a healthcare organization which uses high-value providers with an exceptionally high concentration of clinical expertise, high performance, and related resources centered on a particular set of procedures or medical conditions, delivering accountable care in a comprehensive, interdisciplinary fashion to afford purchasers a clear path for members to achieve excellent outcomes and with financial sustainability for the COE. So, in other words, high-value centers need to invest in systems for operational efficiency to support their clinicians' expertise and performance in order to deliver consistent quality outcomes. And in doing so, these centers make themselves more attractive to the purchasers in their market and ensure sustainable growth of their system. By systematically and structurally addressing the needs of patients, payers, and providers, you'll differentiate yourself in your market. And if you do it right, you'll emerge as a center of excellence. But it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, strong physician and administrative collaboration, and resources. So at Force, we've worked with a variety of health systems that do many things right as it relates to driving efficiency and creating value. But one common gap we still see is in service line management. Some common issues we see in health systems across the country include misalignment between physician and hospital leadership, which all too often creates tension and the inability to execute any strategy at all. We see segmented and siloed care delivery across the episode, and this can be a source of surgery cancellations, under-optimized surgical sites, discharge destinations, as well as unnecessary cost and variation in the post-acute management of the episode. We also see a lot of difficulty with systems trying to implement technology strategies that will align with their vision. So in the next segment of this presentation, we're going to discuss strategies for flipping these pain points into opportunities. So let me hand it back over to Steve to emphasize his sage advice on this.
Thanks, Bronwyn. It's tough advice indeed. Every challenge it can be turned on its head and inverted into an opportunity. And I think today there's more opportunity than challenges if it's done right. But the point I want to make is that this really takes time, and you're going to hear this several times during the course of this webinar that it takes years, and you have to be patient, use your leadership, use some tools. But in the end, what we're really doing here is redefining a creation of your new organizational culture, the behavioral manifestation of a core set of values, and that really takes time. And let me also say that as one of the healthcare leaders here in our facility, we don't have any big sticks. There's no dictatorship here. There's no way to demand these changes. We have a few levers to pull. There are some things that we can incentivize, but mostly it's by extending bushels of carrots. This is not about IQ, it's about EQ, and the new concept of DQ, decency quotient. So it's basically listening to everyone's perspective, and I mean all stakeholders, because everyone has a unique insight, and all of their perspectives adds values. So at CJRI, we have 23 clinical protocols that guide our care delivery. Everyone takes months to implement, and it goes through an extremely iterative process. It goes from somebody with an idea that present to a steering committee, it goes to the LLC, it goes to anesthesia, it goes to the nurses, the PAs, blah, 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 blah. It goes around, and 6 months later, the LLC, the Connecticut Joint Replacement Surgeons, is tasked with ultimately approving a protocol. But no one at the end of the day can say they didn't have input, they didn't have participation. So we don't call them evidence-based. We like to call our protocols consensus-based because, as you know, evidence can change with the next journal. So we really use the term consensus-based, and it seems to work. So just to reemphasize, what we're discussing then is tantamount to a behavioral and cultural transformation, a cultural overhaul for your facility. And that takes years to occur. So, Bronwyn, let me have you kick off on how we accomplish this.
Actually, it's Stephanie, and I'm going to take over this piece and talk about the secret sauce to CJRI and our top-down three-pronged approach to our strategy, which is align, activate, and scale. And our first suggested strategy is around empowering a leadership team of administrators and clinicians to co-create patient-centered, sustainable health value models. The right model should hold the team accountable, not just an individual. In a successful alignment model, you share the risk with your partners. If you don't succeed, you all learn and you all improve together. We discussed the varying provider models for success earlier. Your organization needs a vision that ties together the priorities of all the stakeholders, from per case reimbursement to the long-term growth goals of the organization. For example, we've chosen a bike as our visual metaphor for alignment. Hospitals without clinical support is like a $10,000 bike with flat tires. Here you have the vision and effort, but clinical execution is where the rubber meets the road, so you will lack meaningful execution. Clinicians without hospital support will have a misaligned strategy. We've seen that time and time again, and inadequate resources, a clear path to failure. In this example, it's important to ask who's pedaling the bike. After leadership alignment, you must look to the rest of your team. Then there's activation, and CJRI, we've leveraged our culture of improvement to accomplish this. Culture is driven by innovation and ideas, so by adopting a philosophy of using data and data transparency to drive our culture, we can set ourselves up to perpetually be objective and make better informed decisions. Our CGRI leaders have leveraged data-driven insights to better understand our inefficiencies across the continuum and to evaluate and reevaluate our clinical protocols. We ask, will this change improve outcomes or reduce costs? If not, we stay the course. And since data is the cornerstone of our culture and time between face-to-face interaction accounts for greater than 90% of the episode, we also ask, are there better analytic tools to glean insights of these gaps and in real time? Force has helped us with that. By asking questions with an objective answer, we create a no blame, no shame environment. We all can't be Michael Jordan. Some of us are more like Homer Simpson, but we can all improve and move the curve to the right. So remember, as I mentioned, the idea is to win and lose together, not individually. Everyone being good at their job isn't enough. Everyone has to be good at aligning their skills towards the shared vision. Since we're suggesting using data as our cultural background, one key challenge to be aware of is data overload, and Bronwyn mentioned this as well. Even more so, messy and invalid data, which can lead to lack of clarity, inaccurate conclusions, physicians not trusting what we're presenting, and faulty insights. For example, what does a good online rating really mean? And for our last strategy, I'll turn it back over to Bronwyn.
Thank you, Steph. And, to Steph's point, I think the culture piece is really one of the hardest things to crack, and seeing it in action at CGRI is pretty impressive. But let's say you've mastered strategic alignment and culture, and there are plenty of health systems that have seemingly done so, yet you still lack the ability to execute and grow new business opportunities. When we look under the hood, we find that often these systems are not bridging the gap between digital health and operational excellence. Oftentimes, they're forgetting the key contemporary stakeholder in healthcare, which is technology. But it's not as simple as it sounds. So here's a list of some major themes to follow as you're doing your diligence on the technology partner that's right for you. First, you should ask yourself, is the technology comprehensive? It has to be a single comprehensive platform that can engage and align all stakeholders. So patients need to be able to access virtual rehab and education content that is specific to their care from their physician. Surgeons and care teams need to have transparency and control over what's happening outside of their purview. When the patients are spending 99% of their recovery outside of the health system, we need to be able to give the clinicians that insight so that they can make the right decisions for their patients. And oftentimes we also see that leadership is presented. So when you're looking at your technology, you need to present the leadership with the advanced analytics that are capable of variation analysis, benchmarking, and predicting outcomes. And that really helps you think about, a comprehensive technology partner. Secondly, you need to ask if it's validated. So in essence, does it actually do everything it says it does? So always inquire about clinically validated research and peer references. We're a decade into the digital health revolution, so if the solution you're looking at doesn't have evidence and clinical support, don't trust it. Lastly, you need to think about whether the technology you're choosing can scale and promote your own unique competencies. So as I mentioned, technology is the newest stakeholder in healthcare, and if you make the right choice here, your technology solution will be just as much a part of your long-term plan as your staff. So it needs to fit like a puzzle piece and come with the services that will help you mold your tech strategy and workflows to the future state of your organization. So for the next phase of this presentation, I'd like to let Steph and Steve take you through how they brought their vision to life and give you some hints and share some of their secret sauce on how you can do the same with your system.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Bronwyn. So you're going to hear this word culture many, many times, because I think if we look back over the last 12 years of what has really held us together. You know, it's easy to get to the top, but it's really hard to stay at the top. It really is a culture. And I shouldn't say one culture. There are many cultures that, if anybody would like to come visit, it's sort of palpable. But it started with a vision. With these 10 surgeons I mentioned earlier today that prior to this greeted each other very unceremoniously at times. But we came together, and in this first couple of discussions, we said, you know, we're all equally miserable, number one. Number two, we all wanted to create a world-class destination site for total joint arthroplasty. And instantly we had an alignment. Our interest and our focus, even from day one, was on that goal, developing a world-class destination site for total joint arthroplasty. But that's the easy part. The challenge then is, how do you execute a plan? How do you strategize? How do you operationalize to realize the vision? So now I want you to consider something. I want you to consider the prime importance of leadership to guide the various pathways to success. So I'm going to say something, and if anybody has a different perspective, just email me, let me know. But I've not seen a plan, a program developed, COE or otherwise, where physician leadership and physician engagement were not the single most important segment of the value journey. I just don't know of any. They just can't be passive. So for our physicians, the rank and file physicians, they had to change too. And I call it the willingness test. Are they willing to standardize and give up, you know, I'm the best in the world, I do it this way? Are they willing to standardize? Are they willing to accept decisions based on trusting data? And are they willing to be transparent, not just with each other, which is not easy, but with other folks like our hospital partners? You know, not something that one would ever anticipate will become a reality. And it's a fundamental change in mindset in terms of reimbursement. Are they willing to shift away from the per-click fee-for-service model to something which we refer to broadly as an alternative payment model? So in the spirit of that transparency, very early on, we established an HVAC committee. Funny name, but it stands for Healthcare Value Alliance Council, to openly share surgeon-specific and surgeon-identifiable outcomes and quality and cost data with each other. Because I think when providers recognize and acknowledge the purity of the data, the accuracy of the data, it becomes probably the most powerful transformative tool. So I'm going to tell you a very quick story. Several years ago, before we brought on our director of research, probably 6 years ago now, our infection rate was ridiculously low, so low that I didn't believe it. So I was unwilling then to identify physician-specific data. I was doctor number 11. We brought on Dr. Mike Cremens, who's an incredible fellow, re-architected our registry, and our infection rate doubled, which troubled him very much, but pleased me enormously, because I knew it was accurate. And that became our journey in terms of actionable and credible data. So probably the most galvanizing concept at CJRI is a focus on something called the healthcare value equation. And I would define that as such. The healthcare value equation is the numerator, is the outcomes that matter the most to the patient for their particular problem, over the true cost, not the charge, but the true cost of delivering those outcomes. So that's a galvanizing concept. And the good news is we're finally, not fast enough, but we're finally moving to a market where we start to compete on value, on that equation, not on billboards, I'm number one in the world, and I own more robots, or any other misleading claims. But in this new emerging world, the new market, there will be winners and losers. And frankly, I think potentially more losers than winners, because it's uncertain how many systems are going to be willing to make these transformative changes and offer it at scale. You need to focus like a laser beam on the healthcare value equation to end up on top and come out a winner. But if this is done right, I have little reason to believe that profit margins will not continue to increase. So although fee-for-service reimbursements are shrinking, and by the way, that's the good news, the opportunity to improve revenue streams have never been better. If and only if you learn how to control costs, improve efficiencies, and use scalable digital alternatives and solutions, and then follow the principles of implementing bundled payments. So a number of years ago, we wrote a piece for the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons, December 2012. You can find it online, a 9-step roadmap to building a bundled payment. But in doing so, you start to claw out waste and duplication and low-value services. But if you do that, there's no reason why revenues cannot increase as your own products rise to the top. And by the way, welcome to the age of consumerism, where patients now hold the influence and where spillover from the halo effect of these new programs, new cultures, new models will spill over into other service lines beyond MSK. I mean, we're seeing it in St. Francis in spine and sports, and now into other service lines such as OBGYN and others. But regardless of the service line, the key challenge is agnostic to whatever you practice, wherever you practice. The key challenge is the same. It's shifting away from the fee-for-service payment mentality to predictable pricing and a value-based model. This is what's going to entice the purchasers, the employers, to contract with your organization. Now, off to Steph for a little more detailed presentation of our strategies to initiate and maintain the activated, engaged team at CGRI from top to bottom and from side to side. Steph?
So true, Steve. And as Steve mentioned before, if any of you are not familiar, we encourage all of you to listen to the Daniel Pink's TED Talk, The Puzzle of Motivation. When Steve and I saw this a few years ago, actually many years ago, I should say, we both concluded that fundamentally this is why CGRI works. In it, Pink describes the differences between the extrinsic motivators, contingent financial rewards, and the intrinsic motivators, autonomy, mastery, and purpose, that can affect change in human behavior. And as a hospital administrator, and as I mentioned, Steve brought up earlier, I can tell you firsthand that surgeons prioritize autonomy and control over money. So you're trying to identify the how in your equation. Please consider the tactics implemented at CGRI to activate and empower your teams. Communication is so key with staff across all stakeholder categories with clear strategic goals, plans, objectives. In situations where errors occur, again, create a culture that focuses on process failures rather than people failures or individuals. In 2013, we became ISO certified, and that has enabled us to create a blameless environment of accountability where evidence always vetoes opinion and where a no blame, no shame environment has become the norm. This creates perpetual safety. It creates security for all caregivers, regardless of where they may exist in the ecosystem. No longer are staff fearful of bringing something to someone's attention for fear of retaliation. We are open and all about process, not people. For the staff, or for your staff, provide educational opportunities to advance their skills and career paths, and of course, to provide better care for patients. Finally, building strong, effective, and trusting strategic partnerships and relationships along the entire episode of care is the foundation of the entire value journey at CGRI. And again, we've talked about this several times and how we use data and the modus operandi of our business at CGRI. To play in this space, you'll need comprehensive and what we call actionable data that goes beyond the electronic medical record to include outcomes data, process metrics, financial data, protocol compliance, which presents a challenge to many places. As Steve brought up, our Director of Outcomes Research, Mike Cremens, has described a 4-step adjudication process to scrub the data so it becomes irrefutable. Of all the data we collect, the most important are the patient-reported outcomes, not how we feel the patient's doing, but rather how the patient evaluates their outcome. We collect our PROs with Force so we can easily compare them, not only with each other, but with Force's benchmarks to determine how effective we are at delivering care through Force's platform. And from the feedback from our patients, even our over 80 group, the result has been overwhelmingly positive. As the episode for the total joint becomes shorter and shorter in the hospital piece of this, it's become more important for us to understand the patient experience and outcomes before and after surgery. With Force, we were able to leverage daily patient engagement to receive real-time feedback and data that can be aggregated and used for evidence-based improvement. An example of that is we use Force data to aggregate peak pain levels, showing a pain spike on post-op day 5 after a total knee, something we can now anticipate prior to it becoming an issue. With all this said, it's no surprise the crown jewel of CGRI is our own arthroplasty registry known as the Musculoskeletal Outcomes Institute Registry of Arthroplasty, or what we call MOIRA. With MOIRA, we can easily leverage a culture of evidence vetoes opinion. Recall Deming's famous quote, "Without data, you're just another person with an opinion." Since we accept accountability for outcomes, we always focus in real time on covered complications, readmissions, and ED visits. All this comes back to the core focus of demonstrating creation of patient-centric sustainable healthcare value. Strong leadership to acknowledge improvement opportunities. It can be done, but only by enabling unambiguous multidisciplinary alignment. And for the last section on scaling with technology, I'll send it back over to Steve.
Thank you, Steph. Received. So you can hear from Steph that of all the jewels we have at CGRI, our crown jewel and our rocket fuel is our database. Let me tell you, several years ago, we became interested in the emerging digital health transformation. Healthcare is slow. It's a system of molasses. But even in healthcare, we started to pick up insights about this emerging transformation, and we wanted to be part of it. And we set out on a journey to convert old analog processes with lower costs and scalable digital solutions. And to do our diligence, we established a digital transformation task force. And intentionally, we added diverse stakeholders, especially a core group of what's known as digital natives, not digital immigrants like myself, the 20, 25-year-olds who understood all this sort of stuff. So we had a nice, robust team, and we started looking at various options. And our goal was to limit the number of vendors that we could, because, every vendor seemed to have a little separate little niche, but we wanted to limit the number of vendors. And we wanted to use technology as a tool to align the uniform message that you heard before throughout the entire continuum, where providers and clinicians would have input, control, transparency with respect to our protocols, and maybe even consider this a single source of truth. But we also wanted the ability to, surgeons are surgeons. We all have a little nuances about our protocols. We needed the ability to customize so we can configure our individual protocols to align with our own rehab perspectives. Let me take it one step further. Another intent as we evolved was to consider our tech partner as actually another member of the care team. And ultimately, that partner became Force Therapeutics. And, in this increasingly competitive landscape, there's no reason why your organization shouldn't celebrate this type of relationship and market your personalized digital technology to further differentiate yourself amongst your competitors. Remember, this is 2020. Patients are seeking digital health solutions. And in your marketing strategy, you should let prospective new patients in the market know that you may have the best thing out there. And for your existing patients, be sure that they know, I talk about this with them every day, be sure that they understand the unique value they're experiencing with Force and how we, as their caregivers, can actually continue to improve by sharing the identified data and their patient experience broadly across the entire Force platform. So Steph and I are extremely bullish. I've been in healthcare in practice now for over 30 years, and I've never seen a more exciting time in healthcare. Yeah, there's turmoil and there's all sorts of stuff going on, but there's also tremendous opportunity. And we believe the future is bright for those of us in orthopedics who embrace these changes and participate, better yet, forget participate, better lead the transformation. And it really also bodes well for physicians who are willing to do this. If you want to stick for fee-for-service, it's a depressing journey. Just take a look at the numbers over the last 10 years. It's depressing. But if you look at the distribution and a little pie chart there of each dollar spent under fee-for-service for an episode, which was about 8% of the dollar for physicians, to what it looks like under a bundled payment model where physicians can accrue 23% of the value. It actually bodes well for physicians who are willing to engage and do all the things we spoke about for the last 45 minutes. So we have a unique opportunity. It's an opportunity to fix healthcare, to grow market share, realize profitable growth if we do it right. And Force Therapeutics, or whichever digital solution you ultimately choose, can help in every area of your business, from marketing, attracting new patients, to demonstrating to payers and some of the concierge businesses that send patients from afar that we can manage travel patients and avoid waste and uncontrolled therapy with these virtual solutions. And if you adhere to the principles we've spoken about and to the healthcare value equation, new opportunities will continue to present themselves, and they sure have a CJRI. So here's a list of our current COE contracts and relationships. We have Bridge Health, Edison Health, Optum, United Healthcare, Carum Health, HealthScope Benefits. We're negotiating with 2 other concierge vendors. The payer community that seemed not so interested in this suddenly are awakening and giving us phone calls, and we're in negotiation with the state of Connecticut for their very exciting COE program. So, as we wrap up and conclude, I want to highlight a few points and just bring it all home. Number one, this all takes time. We're talking about years. It takes patience and perseverance, good leadership. But to do it right, it's important to start thinking through your strategy now, starting with a vision that aligns all your stakeholders. 2, related to number 1, be patient. You're making a behavioral transformation, and you can't force that. Strategic alignment with benefits accruing, benefits to all stakeholders, and a clear transition plan are critical for success. 3, related to 1 and 2, is discipline. Stay with your core values, develop this culture and your mission at all costs. And again, that morphs into one of your cultures. I want to repeat, physician leadership, physician engagement are the single most important elements of any successful value-based healthcare journey. So for example, your digital health solution must be clinically based, clinically driven, and clinically validated, and again, include all decision makers in the process. 5, you need to find a willing hospital partner. Steph and I are part of a consulting team, and there are some hospital leaderships that may not ever get it. But if you find yourself a willing hospital partner, hospital system that shares this vision, I think you come out a winner in the market. Number 6, there's going to be real cost, real dollar cost, and for those of us in private practice, opportunity cost associated with adopting these principles and the time that it takes. But in our view, it's well worth it. And finally, choosing the right technology partner and thinking them as, it's new. Thinking them as a new member of the care team can only accelerate your transformation. So in our view, there's never been in modern time conditions that are better suited for those prepared providers to seize upon these opportunities to improve value, especially for our patients and their families, but also to regain the control and do our part to transform what's now currently totally non-sustainable, and our system is on life support. We need to fix that. So that's it, Bronwyn and Steph. We'll turn it over to the moderator.
Hey, Steph.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Bronwyn, Stephanie, and Steve, for that presentation. So with that, we will now begin our question and answer session today. Before we do so, just a quick reminder to our audience. If you have a question for Bronwyn, Stephanie, or Steve, you can submit that by typing that into the Q&A box on your dashboard. And we will try to get through as many questions as we have time for with the time we have remaining. All right. So let's go ahead and get started here. This first question is about that last pie chart that we saw. So this audience member asks, looking at that pie chart, it seems that surgeons at CJRI are sending fewer patients to ECFS and using less outpatient PT. Is this accurate, and how have you been able to do this?
Yeah, thank you very much, Emily. Yeah, it is accurate. And let me preface my response by saying that CJRI is not in any of the federal programs, BPCI. The targets they set for us were just way too low. There was no opportunity. We already run a very efficient program. So anything I'm going to tell you, there was no financial incentives built into this. There was no financial reason to make the changes that we're going to talk about. Yeah, so when we started CGRI, 35% were going to extended care. We're about 8 or 9% now and still trending down. And New England is tough. The culture here for years was everybody went to an ECF. And turning that around took time. And it takes surgeon education. But there's data to show that patients do better at home. There's lower readmission rate. Some people believe there's lower infection rate, but certainly the surgeon loses control when their patient goes to an ECF. We were never able to crack that nut. So for the patient, we believe they're better off going home. And we've been able to convince them, and now the culture is more an expectation that they go home. As far as postoperative physical therapy, again, no financial incentives, but we are tasked with managing the episode. And as of yet, none of these are gain share based. So by paring down physical therapy and looking at virtual alternatives, there's really nothing in it financially for us. However, suddenly patients are waking up and saying, Dr. Steve, my copay is $60 a visit. Do I really need to go to PT for the next 3 months? Bingo, opportunity, because when it's free, it's what's called the moral hazard, where somebody is paying for that risk, not the one who's using those services. So suddenly the patients are actually asking because of their copays or out-of-pocket costs. And the second of all, I think they're starting to understand that solutions are available. They're convenient solutions where they can do this in their own home. So we've implemented FORCE just about a year ago. The response has been overwhelmingly positive. Even the folks in their early 80s are on the FORCE app and doing their therapy at home and loving it without having to get into the car, risk the weather, and all the other sorts of things. So I hope that answers your question, Emily.
Steve, I'll chime in too. I think it's important to note that to get patients home, the hospital has to have a formal preoperative program, a group of nurses or case managers that are calling patients. It's all about educating the patient. What we used to do in the hospital now occurs before they even come for surgery. And again, I think, FORCE, it has been a great platform to send videos. We have a formal class. All of those folks, again, are hired under the CGRI umbrella, but it doesn't happen unless we start the education before they come for surgery.
Yeah, good point, Steph. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. That was very thorough. So our next question here is a bit broader. It's about value-based care. So this audience member asks, how has the stigma and adoption of value-based care changed over the last decade for hospital leaders?
I'll take that since I'm on the hospital side of things. So the adoption of value-based care has really gained momentum over the last couple of years. Although that said, it's been embedded in the CGRI culture since day one. This has largely been driven by a small group of visionary physicians, Dr. Schutzer being one, who gets out nationally to talk to folks about all of this stuff, and hospital administrators, visionary hospital administrators, to lead this journey. I think we brought up several times that alignment that needs to happen. Lowering cost while creating value is not just the responsibility anymore of the hospital. It's about, lowering the right cost at the right time, but also understanding what cost might bring more value to your program and not dismissing that opportunity. Physician alignment and participation with programmatic strategy and cost discussions is absolute to changing the culture. They need to be at the table for all of these discussions and planning. That's what we've done in CGRI. That's what, like Dr. Schutzer said, has made other programs successful. And that's what will dictate the success of future value leaders.
Yeah, I can't risk adding into that too. You mentioned the stigma of value-based healthcare. I'm not exactly sure what you mean, but when you watch TV and you see the best value, whatever, the thought comes to mind, it is cheap. But value is not cheap. Value means better quality. And so I'm not exactly sure what the stigma might be, but we're talking about high-quality products. Listen, we all agree, the data supports this, that 25 to 30% at least of healthcare has no value. In fact, maybe part of the negative convexity of healthcare lead to poor outcomes. So it is an educational process, and as Steph said, hospitals have been used to certain revenue streams, and convincing them to go through this process and change that mindset, in addition to physicians, is a challenge. But we're very lucky at St. Francis Treaty New England to have partners that really believe in this. And listen, it's been a long road. It's been a 12-year journey, and now it's starting to pay off in ROI.
Absolutely. It's a major culture shift there.
Yeah.
This next question is a great one for Bronwyn. I think a lot of providers are facing these challenges. Bronwyn, can you tell us a little bit about how the program addresses opioid drug utilization?
Absolutely, yes. So, a lot of the recurring themes of today have been around how data will set you free, and getting accurate, reliable, trustworthy data is really the cornerstone of creating change. And so in the Force platform, because our patients engage on a day-to-day basis, we are able to collect pain reports from them and watch those pain reports trend over time. And in doing so, we understand, I think more than we ever have before, how patients react to and respond to, recovery after surgery. And so what we can do is, back into what was the pain protocol that was used. Can we reduce the amount of opioids we're giving without having this patient have excessive pain and lower activity levels? And so it's really all about being able to collect this data at scale and really deliver it back to the care team so that they can understand and tweak their protocols accordingly. And so, Steph brought up the total knee study, which we looked at and found that there was this really, across the board pain spike that we saw. And so, we can take action. We can preemptively let the patient know that this is going to happen so that we don't get an unnecessary ED visit, or a patient whose anxiety spikes and then increases the pain level. And so it's really about understanding the data and then affixing an action to it that will help to alter the course of care for that patient. Steph, anything you want to add?
No, I agree. Well said.
Totally agree.
Fantastic. So it looks like we have time for just one more question here. I'm going to send this one over to Steve and Stephanie first to answer. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're using data to support strategic goals and foster alignment? And have you noticed any impacts since making it a priority?
Yeah, I mean, again, we mentioned culture, Emily. That it really is amazing to watch. Listen, surgeons aren't easy. We were raised a certain way. Raised meaning, through residency and so forth, to believe in your convictions, to believe in your conclusions, and even ignore data if it's your own. So, again, we give great credit to Mike Kremens. We've mentioned his name a few times, but no one questions Mike's data anymore. So when we present our data and you look at your month and you go, what happened this month? You sit down and you realize that some of your patients may have received care in another facility. You didn't even know about it. So when data becomes that pure, it becomes actionable. And we use that actively or subliminally to change surgeons' behavior and align them with that equation that we spoke about before. The outcomes that matter to our patients, and listen, we're dealing with osteoarthritis of hip and knee, over the true costs. And that becomes inculcated in everybody's mindset. And it becomes the most powerful tool we have. So when a surgeon has a new widget, we all love new things, new widgets and stuff. The first question that we ask is it going to show a better outcome or reduce costs? If not, why don't we study it and not embrace it wholeheartedly? So, with a limited amount of time, I just want to tell you a little bit, give you a little bit of insight in but it starts with having data that no one can poke a hole in, because once a physician or anybody finds a flaw in your data, they'll never trust it again. Steph, do you agree?
Absolutely. It's been the game changer for us.
Fantastic. So at this time, I would just like to ask Bronwyn, Stephanie, and Steve if you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with our audience today.
Bronwyn, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for, Steph and Steve, for being so open and honest and sharing stuff that I think is really, hard to encapsulate in a white paper. It's just, really that secret sauce that you guys have been able to leverage to create an incredible alignment between your leadership, your physician leadership, and your hospital leadership. And it's a really impressive model. So I hope everybody listening takes a deeper dive and starts thinking about how they can replicate some of the magic that Steve and Steph have created at CJRI.
That's a perfect ending.
Thanks, Bronwyn.
Thank you very much.
And that's all the time that we have today. I would like to thank Bronwyn, Steph, and Steve for their excellent presentation, and Force Therapeutics for sponsoring today's webinar. To our audience, please enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars.